Okay, that helps. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does help. All right. Okay, guys. Well, we have people that are in all different climates these days in this class. So some people in cooler places, others that will be like Roberto in very hot places for this time of the year. Before people are still joining, and while they're joining, I would like to say that I took an hour this morning before our class to review all your comments on our forum last week, and I was quite impressed. I think we are actually building collective intelligence there, right? Some of you probably even took the remarks or the ideas that you were thinking about when you were reading those papers, and some of you even wrote some essays there, right? I appreciate. I learned a lot from these different perspectives and things that you wrote there. Others were more like interacting with the ideas of colleagues who had already either written essays or just exchanged ideas. I think all of that is fine. All possibilities help us develop more knowledge based on different perspectives, and that's what collective intelligence is about. I understand that we will be discussing collective intelligence from different from different angles. They do not all match. For example, today when we discuss the wisdom of crowds, you will see that the wisdom of crowds has a very different understanding of collective intelligence to maybe some of Pierre Lévy's more philosophical ideas. Today we'll be just be basing what we call intelligence on averages or on the main assumption behind some of the authors that we'll be discussing today is that we are all biased. We all, when we are making decisions or when we are analyzing problems, we all have some understanding of the problem and some misconceptions or wrong ideas. And then what is assumed here is that if we're all biased, but if we're not all biased towards the same direction, then the biases we have in our assessments, in our evaluations, will cancel each other when we, let's say, decide collectively based on the mean, the average, or based on the median. In fact, you will see that there are even some good arguments for us to use the median instead of the mean as a statistical way of getting, a more central perspective. Okay, it's completely different to some of the other ideas that we'll be seeing in this course. And I know that some of you, and I don't know if Milton is around already. Milton, haven't seen him here. Maybe he's there. I don't know. Milton was concerned that we, with those very traditional definitions of data, information, knowledge and wisdom. I think as any other way of modeling reality, that gives us some easy understanding of let's say, the decision process phenomenon. But at the same time, of course, it is simplistic. And I have to agree with something that Milton wrote there when he says, well, we usually say that information is organized data, but it's not always that, right? Sometimes information is also not organized at all. And information still needs to be put together with other pieces of information in order to improve the quality of our assessment. But anyway, as I said, I was really impressed with the quality of your reflections. I definitely want to do more of that. So I already intended to have always the second half of our class for us to interact in a written way, so that we create something that is a little more stable. But at the same time, I was thinking, of course, generating documentation, let's say, is something that takes time. And it's important that we also have some time to benefit from the documentation that we developed. So someone asked me last class if the only time that we would be using to work on the forum would be from, let's say, 10:20 after the break until midday. And I had said, well, I prefer that it happens like that, because there's still some synchronicity in the sense that we're all dealing with that. So we're seeing with what others are doing, and we're reacting faster to what they were doing. But I changed my mind a little bit from last week to today, also because I saw that some of you posted also your reflections during the week. And I thought that it works as well, right? So I would propose that we change it from today on, and we may change it again later if we think that we're doing something better. But that what we do is we try to spend those 2 hours focused on doing that in a time that everyone is still around, and that we write something and we have the opportunity of seeing someone reflecting to that or reflecting to or responding to that. And then we can keep going on a dialogue. Let's say it's easier to establish Makina's dialogue when we have a lot of opportunities to interact. And in that 2 hour time frame, I think we do have more possibility of interacting. But we'll keep it open as we actually did, because I didn't include any electronic tool to prevent you from doing it afterwards. And we'll keep doing that during the week as well. But considering that we spend then all that amount of time building some text, I think the change that I would like to propose here is that when we start our writing time after the break, before we start writing, we take again the first half an hour. We will review what we wrote and what other colleagues wrote for the previous week, right? And maybe we can still have some more interaction on the topic of the previous week. But I think that there is a lot that was written there that maybe some of the colleagues didn't have a chance of seeing, and that could contribute to our collective intelligence, right? So the change that I propose from today on is on the second half of our class, before we start dealing with the texts, the papers, the book, well, in this case, the book chapters and that we read for the class, and we start writing about them, we still go back to what we wrote the previous week, and at least we reread everything that the colleagues wrote there. And if we still want to do any interaction there, we do that, right? And we are in a larger group this time. I think we're about 30 people that are, let's say, interacting here. Some are not students. There are even a couple of professors that will show. When I'm talking about professors, I mean again, graduate professors. I know that most of you, or many of you, are also professors in the sense that you also already have your academic careers happening and everything. But anyway, there will be, what I'm trying to say is that there are people that are not going to be with us every week, but they will be with us when the topic is of particular interest to them. Right? Okay, having said that, let me go back here to our Moodle to show you what we plan to do today. We have, when we start, discussing Surowiecki's book. In fact, we will stick to Surowiecki's book for today and for next class. So we'll have two classes that will be completely, let's say, focused on the wisdom of crowds. And we have to keep in mind that this is not the mainstream collective intelligence approach, but it may be reasonable and important in many very practical collective intelligence decisions. For example, organizations have been developing very interesting ways of relying on the wisdom of crowds on the internet, for example, or on social networks, to try and figure out their own decisions and their own practices. If we think, for example, of Amazon first asking all its users to review the products that they buy, then you could say, well, that's more qualitative. Whoever wants to buy a product and read some reviews, nobody's going to read thousands of reviews. People are going to read just a few reviews, right? But still, what happens there is that Amazon has its users assessing or evaluating the products that they buy, and then they have other users assessing the quality of the reviews that are being made, right? Which means that whenever we see a review on Amazon, it is probably not going to be just another review. It's going to be a review that many other users have thought to be important for their decision making, and therefore, using this idea here of everything ends up being explained by the average. For example, if a lot of people liked and thought that review was a good review, there's a great chance that you will also find it to be a good review for your intents. Okay, so we'll see there's a lot of use of wisdom of crowds to solve practitioner problems in organizations, and there is also a lot of room for academic discussion, because Surowiecki's ideas, although Surowiecki wrote I'll call it a bestseller, right? It's one of these books that people buy to read when they're flying or when they're traveling. Or Surowiecki did not have the intent of writing an academic book that was solely based on scientific knowledge, right? So there's a lot of room for us academics to try and test some of the assumptions in Surowiecki's book based on a scientific methodology, right? And although, of course, he is let's say, he's freer in his writing than we are in our academic writing, he also did some research, right? And I'm not saying here that his book is or that his statements are without any grounding. No, he actually based his book on information that he either collected through his own more journalistic research or even some academic data. But there is room for us here to try and check the possibilities of these ideas of the wisdom of crowds. And of course, we have a lot of empirical evidence, although maybe not necessarily collected and organized in a more scientific way. But when we see, for example, the way Google uses all the information it collects from us to make its own next decisions about its own products, we can figure out that there's a lot of value that is, I wouldn't say that even hidden behind the wisdom of crowds. There is a lot of value that is obvious there in the wisdom of crowds. Okay, so we have Surowiecki. Today we will work basically on the introduction chapter and chapter 1, just to give you a feeling. Next week we will work on a few more chapters. We will not read the whole book through for the class, but I hope that those of you who get interested by his ideas end up doing that. We just do not have the time to spend that long discussing just the wisdom of crowds. And then, of course, we'll also rescue one of the authors, let's say a more academic author, that inspired Surowiecki in his work. And then I brought that paper by Galton, Francis Galton, this statistician who in the early 1900s wanted to prove the wisdom of crowds wrong. In fact, and this is something that I had already anticipated to you in our previous class, that Galton was an honest researcher, more honest than we usually are, and I have to tell you that because, of course, we are honest in the sense that we do not want to fake the results of our research, but many times when we're doing research, we are already biased by our own preconceptions about what we're studying. And I noticed, for example, that when you're expressing your feelings about the papers that you had read, a few of you for last week, a few of you enjoyed one paper more than you did the other, and then other colleagues enjoyed a different paper. If you ask why, I could possibly say that it's because the papers you liked the most were those that reaffirmed, made you a stronger believer in ideas that you already had. Right? Of course, sometimes we also enjoy reading papers that destroy our previous ideas, make us think differently. But in general, we're looking for confirmation. And in that sense, I think I honor Francis Galton, because he was there, his idea, he was an aristocrat, and he thought that the crowds knew nothing, and he actually wanted to prove that it was better to have some aristocrats decide the destiny of the country, for example, than having free elections involving all citizens. Citizens were, in his previous understanding, were dumb and would never get, democracy would never lead to the best choice of our, let's say, our leaders. That was Francis Galton's idea. That's where he started his studies from, and he ended up figuring out by this experiment and other evidence, but the experiment that he reports here in this paper, he figured out that he was wrong. Right? For those of you who are acquainted with Popper's ideas of defining a hypothesis and then trying to falsify that hypothesis, this is a way that we, in our scientific development, found to try and avoid this confirmation error that many times makes it difficult for researchers, even honest researchers, in the sense that they're honest, that they don't want to write any fake science or anything, but to make sure that they they can get to a situation where they say, well, I believed I had this hypothesis, but it could not be confirmed. Right? If I could not confirm my hypothesis, then I end up having what we call H1, right? The hypothesis 1 prevail over H0. Okay, but anyway, so we also have this paper by Galton that we will try and see what your understanding of it was. And then I included here a few other things. Of course, I had some a little video here about Galton's idea. Then we had also a text on how CIA, the North American police, found the way that they found to bring collective intelligence or the wisdom of crowds into their thinking their problems. Well, last year, one of the students, this is why it's here. Sometimes when you bring things in, you say, "Oh, look at this," and I find it interesting. I also include here. So Mateus, one of the students of last year, had found this video by Attila Yamarino, who probably many of you know from all his reports on COVID during the pandemic. But he had already done a beautiful job here explaining these ideas of the wisdom of crowds. And then some more additional stuff. I like Louis Rosenberg's perspective on what he calls swarm intelligence, or which again relates to that more biological ideas of intelligence happening as what happens with bees or ants. And he even built some software to help people decide more collectively. Right? For example, we sort of use some procedures to try and make collective intelligence based on the wisdom of crowds more balanced. For example, even for the elections, when we have elections in 2 terms, we first decide on the 2 major, let's say, opponents, and then we have a second round of the election only among those 2. We are trying to make sure that people's ideas, even if they don't get the candidate that they wished the most, that they can still have a second alternative that is the closest to that. But our system is still, I mean, it could be electronically, it could be perfected a lot, right? Because the way it happens today is we start playing with our own decisions on the candidates that we would like to support based on who apparently has better chances of succeeding, and according to usually to surveys. Then of course surveys that are monitored and so that we try preventing that they're biased, but it's not the actual election, and many people may change their decision on their, let's say, on their vote based on the idea that they want to have what we call here in Brazil a useful vote, right? A vote that will lead to better chances of a specific candidate winning. What Louis Rosenberg presents in his software is the possibility of doing this in a more, how would I say, in a more dynamic way, right? You would not have to first choose 2 options and then among those 2 decide on the best one at the end. It's a more fluid. There's even a representation there. For example, this UNO software. It's almost like if, for example, if we had all the candidates in a round table, and you had each of the voters with magnets around the table, and they would be moving around, trying to make sure that the piece of or the iron ball that is in the middle comes to the side that they're with. It's an interesting concept. Again, you will see each one of these authors propose something that agrees with other ideas that we've seen before, but also has its own assumptions, which makes it never the same concept, right? So Milton just joined us, and Milton and those of you who are, and I think we all should be if we're doing science, we all want to be as precise as we can with the terms that we use, with the expressions that we use, with the ideas that we are discussing. We will have a lot of work over the next few years to make sure that we get to a better stance with collective intelligence than we ever got to that Akov model of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, or whatever, right? I'm not sure if we'll get there, but this is one of the tasks that whoever is studying collective intelligence has ahead of him or her, right? To make sure that we make it very clear what kind of collective intelligence we're talking about when we're developing our research. Right? For this class here, we can be messier because, of course, we'll be presenting a lot of different perspectives. But when you choose your perspective, when you choose the kind of research that you're doing, make sure that you distinguish that from other uses of the same terms and expressions, so that whoever reads your work reads one thing and understands that same thing, and not read something and understand something else, right? Which is there's a huge possibility of miscommunication there if we are not rigorous about the terminology we use. So I appreciate Milton and some of the others who have, even in our forum there, already pointed out to the fact that we will have to be precise with respect to our definitions, concepts, and so on. Okay? All right, and well, I had to bring even Brian and Paige here. You know who these guys are? The guys who started Google, right? Google is a 1999 venture. In 1998, Brian and Paige, the two founders of Google, were still at Stanford, and they were working on their graduate research. And they wrote this paper that I included here. I included it here more for fun than anything else. You will see that great entrepreneurs or great business people, like these guys definitely are not necessarily great scientists in the sense that their paper, well, it had a chance of fail a conference, right? So it even has some minor mistakes. But the thing is, they had a great idea behind them. They said, and at that stage, we had this huge problem of making sense of the internet. I remember that in the 90s, if you wanted to look for some information on the web, sometimes you had to guess the URL, right? You had to guess, let's say, well, if this company is on the web, I believe that its URL, its link, it's going to be this one, right? It was a horrible place to be trying to find anything there. Many of the first search engines hired thousands of people to manually categorize the content that was available on the web. And of course, that was not an alternative that would be able to deal with the amount of data that was being generated and that was being made available to mankind. Right? So when Brian and Paige came up with this algorithm that they show here in this academic paper, they were saying, well, this is how we think that we will solve this problem, right? And of course, it worked because otherwise, Google would not be the search engine that it came to be, and the company wouldn't be the success that it turned out to be. And it was all based on the wisdom of crowds. Right? It's this particular type of collective intelligence here, because what they did, the basic assumption behind their algorithm was, if Alex Alexandre is a fan of Coca-Cola, and if Alexandre built a web page where the expression Coca-Cola appears 1,000 times, previous algorithms would say, well, this is definitely the most important content on the web on Coca-Cola, because it's really focused on that. If we look at Coca-Cola, the company, if you look at their websites, you will not see Coca-Cola written 1,000 times, right? Because they will be, showing their products, discussing their products. And if Alex wanted to, for those first search engines, if I wanted to have a page that ranks higher or that appeared before Coca-Cola's web page, you know what I had to do back then? I just had to write Coca-Cola 1,000 times. I would write it in, let's say, in yellow, and then I would include in my website a yellow background so that nobody would even see the word Coca-Cola there. But the algorithms, the previous algorithms, would lead to my page and would rank it higher than Coca-Cola's page. And that was a problem. How did Google solve that problem? They basically said, well, if that page that this person wrote has a link to Coca-Cola's official page, And if Coca-Cola's official page has no link to this amateur page, Coca-Cola's, well, the Coca-Cola firm's page will definitely have to be more important, right? Because the fans refer to their, let's say, to their idols, but the idols hardly ever refer to their fans, or if they do not do it in a way that thousands of, well, it's not that thousands of idols refer to a single fan. It's usually thousands of fans that refer to a single idol. That was the principle behind the algorithm that Breen and Page discussed in the paper here. And it's basically wisdom of crowds, because it says a lot of humble people know what is what site is important when we're talking about Coca-Cola, because they will all be pointing out to the same place. Right? We'll see that the wisdom of crowds is something important. I included here again, as I try to do. I'm not sure if this is going to be an efficient way, but being a collective intelligence class, I'll stick to it. I'll always have or many times I will include a wiki where you can include, for example, if you find other papers or books or whatever that you find interesting about the wisdom of crowds, you can include it here in the wiki, and it will be available to all of us, right? And then we'll have our discussion forum where we will be discussing more formally and in written in the papers of the day. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. And I would also like to try and flip our class a bit and see what your impressions were about Surowiecki. I can tell you that different people will have different impressions. Some will say, well, this is just a bestseller. Others will say, this may change my life because I find here ways I can deal even with let's say, the stock markets. There's a lot of people using Surowiecki's ideas to succeed in the stock market. So I'm curious to know what were the ideas that came up to your mind when you were reading this intro and chapter 1 of Surowiecki. Who wants to be first?
Okay, there's no worry.
There you go, Milton.
Over the hand, so let me start. I like it. It's not an academic book, so it's not a problem. To be clear, nah? But if one goes there to find some rigorous treatment of cases, probably it's not the best possibility. But I like it that there are several ideas that are put together. They are the author, no? So look at is packing together several different contexts and trying to make a case. There is something that we must be aware of, that people can handle things in a better way than just a single person. And there are some situations when we saw this and we can learn from this. Sometimes the treatment of the cases are so fragile. I try to read some information about the case he brings to the point. For example, the case of the scorpions. I find some reports on that, and there are some details that are important. But I like the book, the protagonist. My impression is that sometimes they try to force our social marmita. I don't know how to say this in English. So there are some examples that I really do not understand why the example is there. For example, in the automobile, the oldest car. I don't know exactly. I try to read it twice to understand, but
Milton, I think some of the ideas that he brings in the introduction and chapter 1, he will come back to a little later, and it will be probably a little easier to understand. I think that one thing that is important for us here is when does he think, or what are the conditions he thinks that are absolutely necessary for the wisdom of crowds to happen? Because if those conditions are not there, then he himself already says, well, there is no chance the wisdom of crowds will work. Is that something that you took notes, you guys? Anyone?
May I?
Sure.
Okay, hold on. Let me turn on the camera. Not in the book, but I saw the video of his TED talk back in 2005, the one that was the link, and he was very clear with his example regarding the blogosphere coverage of the 2004 tsunami. And I thought it was a perfect example of what he considered the wisdom of crowds and the circumstances that he listed as, the necessary criteria for circumstances for it to happen. So I think there was of course the technology component, the internet that allowed for a network to form. In this case, a network dedicated to gathering information and first-hand accounts of the tsunami as it happened. He even showed videos taken from by people who were there as it happened. And I think in that particular example, there was this the technology component, the web as a network, allowing for a network to be formed, and a sort of necessity and focus, a unique level of focus on that on that particular incident, the tsunami, and the need to report and gather information, not only gather information, but report and broadcast information about it. So this sort of wisdom or collective intelligence gathered around that particular event and the magnitude of it, and this need to spread information, awareness, and first-hand accounts of what happened, even especially now, because even the traditional news coverage took their time to be present at the site and make broadcast a sort of official coverage. So the people that were there, the bloggers, they moved first and created this network that allowed for the world to know what happened, the natural catastrophe, how it happened, and the people that were there, their accounts on this event way before the regular traditional media was able to report. So I guess there are some of the circumstances, the particular circumstances that allowed for that sort of he said it's sort of bottom-up phenomenon and structure. A particularly big phenomenon, technology to establish a network, and this dedication and focus on this goal of reporting and broadcasting information about it.
Okay, Nicole, for what you said, let's stick first to this technology thing. And this may be, I think I've already mentioned that in one of our previous classes, that if it were not for the developments in information systems more recently, collective intelligence would never have gotten to become a buzzword or to become a topic that interests so many people, not only in academia, but of course only in the practitioners' works. You will see, we will dedicate a whole class on the phenomenon that we call Web 2.0, that many even consider to be a synonym to collective intelligence, because Web 2.0 was happened when we realized that all the technology that we had already available on the internet allowed us for something more than what we were doing, let's say in the 90s and maybe up to the early 2000s. That was using the internet just as a content holder or a repository of data. Some companies were already using the internet in the 90s to build the dialogue, as as explained by Makina, or as very practically done by Dell computers, build a dialogue with customers, with suppliers, using the web to give voice to others instead of just using it as a broadcast technology. So at the beginning, many saw it as a broadcast technology as any other, because simply when we get a new technology, we look at the problems that we already had, we look at the solutions we had, and we think, how can this technology help me provide the world with more of the same, right? We want to keep doing what we do. And it takes a while until we realize that more of the same is not what the world needs. It's not the best way of us to provide value to society. And in this case, Web 2.0 was not a technological shift. It was a mentality shift. It was basically converting the technology that we already had and that allowed companies and, well, I'm talking about organizations here, but whoever, to engage others and provide others the opportunity of participating of decision making. So this is something important. Technology brought this possibility. But I think that the main warnings Surowiecki gives us for those situations where the wisdom of crowds works is if the wisdom of crowds is something that happens in a way that we can cancel biases, right? It's a must that we have a let's say a sample of participants in whatever we're doing that is not all biased. If there is bias, then the wisdom of crowds will very quickly turn into the stupidity of crowds.
Yeah, but when reading the book, something that pop-ups as very relevant to Slovakia is, in my opinion, is that the most important examples are the ones that are about decentralized and non-deliberative decisions, when people do not talk to each other, and there is some kind of aggregation, and there are aggregators. Yeah? So they talk about the collaboration, coordination, but I believe that most important, at least at chapter 5 and 6, is aggregation.
Yeah, in fact, Milton, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm already interrupting you there. Aggregation is the key to the wisdom of crowds. Collaboration isn't. In fact, they say if you start collaborating, there is a risk that you're going to be influenced. And the concept behind the wisdom of crowds is do not collaborate. Each one of the agents works on their own, and then you have this aggregation of results, and you make sense of the aggregation. Right?
That to me, it seems like a backward reasoning. They depart from the internet and went back to expand things on this model. And that's something that makes me wonder, because it's a kind of utilitarian approach, liberalism, techno-liberalism approach, using this, because there's no society, and any kind of cooperation and then the exchange of information will produce bias in thinking and the social influence over people, and this will produce no viable results and not the best result. So that's something that comes up to my mind as you talk about philosophy. That's the thing. It's kind of
you're perfectly right on that as well, Milton. So you could even state that the wisdom of crowds has it may have an ideological agenda, as any, as we always do, right? So the wisdom of crowds would be, well, I hate these words, liberalism, because I think things are so mixed up these days, right? But it does involve a concept that probably you would say, well, it's more like a right-wing thing, right? Because it says each one thinks on their own, each one does things on their own, and then we just aggregate it puts a lot of emphasis on the individual first, right? And only gets to something that is collective as a result of some mathematical procedure, not of debate, of changing other people's ideas, and so on and so forth. So why do companies, why do organizations or for-profit organizations love the wisdom of crowds? Because each of the individuals participates with little effort. Many times they will not even notice that they are performing any effort. So, I don't know if any one of you ever wrote a check to Google for all the work that you have done for them, right? Say, well, I've been doing a lot of searches on Google recently, and I will charge you for that because, of course, I'm providing you with rich information and you're not paying me for that, right? We don't think of that because the effort that we do is much smaller than maybe even the benefit that we get, the little candy that Google gives us when it provides us with quick and with fast results to the questions that we pose there. Seems to us to be more than a reward for the effort that we put into it. But companies love that, if they can. It's almost like divide to conquer in the sense that each one does a very little effort, and then they just they have the technological means that put all these little efforts together, and this becomes a great result, a huge result. But then, as all of those who put their efforts do not have the feeling that they put much effort, at least they do not ask for any compensation. They don't want money. They don't even think that they should get any love or glory from that, right? So there's no need to provide rewards because of the way it was organized. So in that sense, yeah, I think there is a lot of possible philosophical debate. Is this the direction we would like to go as mankind? For example, these days there are a lot of people who talk about the possibility of a, let's say, electronic democracy based on a big brother scheme where you just, whenever you have any issues, everyone just goes there and votes. Is that the kind of society that we want to build? Oh, probably not, right? So probably the wisdom of crowds will help solve some more pragmatic problems, will help us build more pragmatic things, like build concrete things, but it will probably not be the way to build a better society, because building a better society means not averaging the results of each person's wishes, but probably means also having to concede to others that think differently and that will never think the same way we do, understand that they think differently, and not simply cancel them because they are a minority, for example. So the wisdom of crowds, for example, as a democracy establishing principle, would lead to what we already see many times: the tyranny of the majorities, right? Whoever gets the majority imposes its ideas to whoever became a minority. We know that this doesn't take us to a better world. This can actually only take us to genocides, to putting minorities down, instead of thinking that because they're minorities, they're more fragile. They're the ones that need more consideration. So see how many different, sometimes little issues allow us for philosophical discussion that we won't even have the time to do here. But you're perfectly right there. These different perspectives, to some extent, they have their own agendas, or they fit better the agendas of specific people or specific groups, the specific stakeholders. I, in fact, prefer to think that we should not stick to any of them, because we do not, our own agendas are not always, completely adjusted to a specific mindset. Right? And that way, again, when I say that I don't like the definitions that we have today, for example, for right and left, it is because many of the ideas that I thought that were more to the left seem to be embraced by extreme right, the extreme right, and vice versa. Besides, I think that we should keep our not our individual, but even our collective freedom to agree or disagree with ideas that we have already agreed or disagreed in the past, and possibly that will happen anytime that we feel that we went too far in whatever direction in life. We'll see too much is probably not good. But anyway, I hope I haven't made this more too confusing, but you're right there, that the wisdom of crowds is based on the individuality of each participant, and it actually assumes that if there is a lot of coordination or cooperation, maybe the wisdom of crowds is at risk, because whoever has the power of coordinating or a group may already bias that group, in the sense that may influence the group with his or her own ideas, and that will end up not allowing the wisdom of crowds to work. Okay, so we already have this technology, as Michelle, sorry, I think it was Michelle, right? Nicole, who said that that's definitely something very important for the wisdom of crowds, and this the idea of aggregation instead of coordination. Although they say, well, we do need to coordinate, but aggregation here is important because you want to aggregate without a lot of discussion. Based on that assumption that we all have different biases, and that if we have a group with different biases, that they will cancel out each other. What else?
Can I? It's right here. I'm not turning my camera on if it's not a problem, because I'm in a hotel room. I'm actually on vacation, but I'm here. Good question for the class. I think I have two main issues or questions on this topic, and specifically on the article on the TED Talk. The first one is, in the article or in the first chapter of the book, it says the author mentions, using averages as a way to access this collective intelligence, and in those specific cases, he was mostly talking about, numeric data that was being that was being used. And then on the TED Talk, it talked about how bloggers wrote about the tsunami in Asia, and there's a big difference between aggregating numbers and aggregating textual-based data, which isn't formatted or easy to manipulate. That's one of my main questions. How do you aggregate non-numeric data? And I would argue that even Google doesn't do that. It is able to aggregate in a sense that learns and creates connections between topics and pages and etc. But it doesn't aggregate the information. So it doesn't know what it's talking about. It just creates connections and it doesn't know what they mean. So it's difficult. I don't know how or if we can do this.
My question back to you is: do they need to know?
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think they need to know. Yeah, but when we as people, we need to to actually read all of these logs and create our own understanding of what's happening. And then and then in organizations, it's when we have a lot of data, it's hard to do. So that's just one of the issues that I not issue, but it's a question. I don't know. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. And it's probably case by case, but that's one thing that makes it hard.
Yeah, Georgie, definitely no simple answer. But I would say that even for those things that you cannot aggregate because, as you say, they're not as quantitative, you can again ask the crowds to do that classification for you, right? And again, to turn that into numbers or something that you can crunch and find means or medians or whatever, right? Of course, this is a process that is being developed, and there is research being developed that way. Companies are doing the research and development departments. Mainly these companies that are really into this are working on that. And of course, that is a challenge. As you say, it's much easier to aggregate numbers, but we do have aggregation of qualitative data being done automatically. And again, in quite successful ways for the purposes that they've been doing, and many times without let's say whoever is aggregating even having to concern about the meaning that is being developed by the users themselves. After all, the decision making the decision making process is happening by the crowds. One thing that we'll have to decide to discuss later is that whenever we turn to the crowds and the crowd starts to decide, that means that organizations, at least they'll have the feeling that they're losing control, right? After all, it's the crowds that are making decisions, right? So these need some organizations will have to change their culture or to debate about that, so that they do not try to, let's say, in this case, it's not really opening the dialogue. It's different here to the ideas McKenna provided in his paper. We're averaging numbers here, right? But if averaging those numbers will lead us to decisions, is it okay if the boss then goes there at the end and says, no, I don't agree, so let's do it differently? It may be, what I want to say here is, but maybe not even in the wisdom of the crowds are involved as particles. People are not, most people are not putting a lot of effort into that, and so they may not even consider that they were part of the decision making. But when we get to organizations and when we start fostering collective intelligence in organizations, and then as soon as the collectives get to an idea that is different to what the boss thought, and the boss says, oh, okay, so let's go back to my way of thinking, that kills collective intelligence forever. Well, we have a lot of raised hands there. I think Guilherme was the first one, so let's do Guilherme, and then maybe I don't know what was the other of those, maybe Nicole and then Jordi again.
Okay, thank you. So I have two questions, actually. The first one is still regarding the conditions, the four conditions: the diversity of opinion, independence, decentralization, and aggregation. So I was wondering, how can I...
Could you repeat that again? This is what I was looking for when I first asked you what were the important issues for the wisdom of crowds. Say those four things again.
The first one, diversity of opinion.
Okay.
So each person should have some private information, even if it's just eccentric interpretation of the facts. The second one, independence. People's opinions are not determined by the opinions of those around them. The third
Perfect.
one, decentralization. People are able to specialize and draw on local knowledge. And the fourth one, aggregation. Some mechanism exists for turning private judgments into a collective decision. So to me, this is I found this is really important because the cases, the examples, they're good to prove that it might work. But these four conditions draw my attention because then I start to think, how can I do it? If I want to create these conditions, are there any other research or ways to do it?
Yeah, that's the challenge, Guilherme. What we're saying. So in the perfect world, wisdom of crowds is perfect, but we don't live in the perfect world. We never know if the population that we're involved is not biased. We never know if those four conditions will all be met. This is there's a lot of room there for research. There's a lot that has already been sorted out, but it's still challenging. And in fact, you can see how challenging this is by simply looking to where we have gotten with our democratic processes all over the world, right? And again, I never want to turn this into politics discussion because I know that in this group here, we will find that each one of us is trapped in a different echo chamber, right? We are all biased, and we are very biased because we listen to people that reinforce our ideas more than we listen to people that make us think differently. So if that happens even among smart people, fancy what's happening to the world right now. So this is a huge challenge. I mean, nobody would deny the fact that it's important to have access to good information to making good decisions. The problem is we are all searching for that good information in places where we will get information that pleases us. And it's very interesting to see how people in this polarized world, when you very quickly depict what their poll is, you already know everything that person is going to say. You know who the people that they think to be competent are. You know who the most horrible people in mankind are. You know their arguments. I mean, if you've been exposed to the arguments of different echo chambers, but we are all in echo chambers. Even those of us who say none of the above or whatever, we are in our own echo chamber. So how do we deal with that? I don't know, Guilherme. We definitely have to deal with that because we hope we can live in society again in the future. And living in society, living in community means, well, first, if not sharing the same perception of the world, at least sharing some data, some information that at least we agree that is common, right? Right now we don't have even that. Right? People live different realities, and if they live different realities, it's impossible to have them come to any agreement because they do not agree even on the data that will provide them information so that they can build knowledge and get to some wisdom to make any decision making. So it's a huge challenge that we have ahead of us. So we do have the technology that could allow for that, but could also and has done exactly the opposite most times. Right? Has helped people become more involved with the ideas that they already believe in. I think I read this morning when I was reviewing your participation in the forum. I remember that someone said, "Would it be good if we were exposed to some random idea that is different to ours, sometimes at least, so that we can think, well, there's something else in addition to that word that I already know and manage." But no straight answer there. But a lot of opportunities to do research, a lot of opportunities for, and I know most of us here are researchers, but there are a few of us, there are a few people here that are more practical guys that are want to start working on something. There's a lot of opportunity here to also do some even activism towards improving mankind, considering that many others were faster than us in destroying our civilization to some extent, understanding the same principles that we're trying to discuss here. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. My bias is business bias, so I work with this. So I work with companies. I try to solve issues, and always trying to bring a collective, intelligent perspective. But usually, I think I could have more research to prove. So then I don't actually go to this explanation, and I just go to the solution. But when I ask this, so this is really important for me because I can read these conditions and interpret and try to use it. Yes, I need diversity of opinion, and I can create a framework to explain this to the client, and probably he will understand. But then it would be really interesting to have frameworks created by people from research. So this is why I usually tend to ask these questions. So for me, this is already interesting to have these 4 conditions. It's already interesting, but to have more information about these conditions, it would be really interesting. And my second question is regarding these cases, these examples, and also other reading that I did before. Usually, collective intelligence is related to examples of guessing and betting, and I understand why, because probably it may be easier to find data and prove. But my question is, are there any other examples regarding decision making, maybe for business planning? For example, I'm trying to make up an example right now. Should we invest, and it doesn't need to be a global example, should we invest in the Santa Catarina state with our company, this new product? So I think it would be really nice if there are any other examples regarding this, because I understand usually issues like democratic issues, they're really complex. But when I work, I usually have it's not about Brazil, it's about a company, it's about an ecosystem, and it's easier to find diversity of opinion. So I just not can prove, but people from inside the company and people from another stakeholder usually is already a good diversity of opinion. So that's my question. Are there any other research regarding this different examples, like business?
Yeah, Guilherme, well, first of all, the reason why the wisdom of crowds is usually related to maybe what you say here, guesses or opinions, it is probably because the wisdom of crowds is based on, it has to be very easy, very simple. You don't want, the wisdom of crowds does not need commitment of those involved. You want to know their very quick impression. Because when you have the very quick impression about that different people have about a problem, and then you sort that out in this very mechanical way, the mean or the median or whatever, you already have some good direction being pointed out by that. But you don't want them to go through huge processes of reflection and thinking, because that would also start involving their even their intent to convince others, right? I mean, when you put a lot of effort into something, you feel that you know something about that, right? And then when someone else has a different opinion, you want to go there and show that you're right, right? And then you're already biased or biasing others. So it sort of goes against the principle of the wisdom of crowds to have very demanding tasks. Okay? And besides, the wisdom of crowds as a way of providing someone with directions. It's again, you want to it's exactly what you were thinking. You as a business-oriented person, you want to know what your customers would think of something, but you don't want them to spend to spend a long time doing that. You don't want them to commit too much, because if they commit too much, that will also generate expectations. For now, you don't want to generate expectations. You just want again the same way. I think that electronic democracy, as a way of having thousands of plebiscites or thousands of votings involving the customers every week, I think it's a horrible way of this. Even I mean, talking about that is definitely saying I don't want to be democratic at all, because I don't want to discuss ideas. I just want to. I hope I can impose my ideas if I am the majority, or I will even accept that others impose their ideas on me if they are the majority. That for democracy, I think that's horrible. For companies, for organizations, for business, it may be a way of doing things in some circumstances, not all circumstances, right? There are, for example, small groups. In small groups, you may, instead of using the wisdom of crowds, you may prefer to use a lot of debating of ideas or conceptualizing in group and everything. But if you have thousands of people that you want to grasp what they think about something, maybe the wisdom of the crowds may be the way. Again, Guilherme, thank you very much for having mentioned those four, let's say, requisites. I can tell you it's probably a little frustrating. We will never have those conditions absolutely assured. Of course, we always have to look for them. There are ways that we can at least help them not to be sabotaged, right? There are ways that we can work with respect to the way we try to obtain the wisdom of crowds that doesn't bias them from start. But it's impossible to be completely sure that you have all those conditions in place. And this is probably a reason why we shouldn't stick to only this tool. It's just a tool that you will use in some situations. You may get it confirmed by other ways of thinking and deciding in other situations, because there's no way to ensure anything here. Okay. We had we had Nicole, I think, and then Jordi, and then Milton.
I don't know if I think the conversation has moved.
Okay. Oh, sorry. No
Excuse
worries.
me?
No, sorry. So you I noticed that you had put your hands down, but I think that sometimes the system does that to you automatically. So, but anyway, we can go back to the topic if you wish.
I think the conversation moved forward, but there was a point raised that I found relevant about how to harness qualitative data and opinion in the wisdom of the crowds, and how that is a challenge for technology companies. And I was wondering if that is, although there is research on it, if that is really a pressing concern, because what we do see about how to manage qualitative information is that, as we were discussing, the responsibility over it is placed upon the crowd itself. If we take social media, for instance, communities tend to manage and moderate the content themselves, away from within the company's policies. Let's say Facebook, Instagram, all the meta social platforms. There are the guidelines, but the communities tend to manage themselves. The crowds, each little crowd inside those environments tends to manage themselves, which creates the echo bubbles and other phenomena. But I wonder if maybe based on what we actually see on how these social platforms act in managing their crowds, is that perhaps maybe giving that sort of responsibility to the users themselves, and their collective intelligence or stupidity, it sort of lifts the responsibility and accountability of those companies about the information they spread and information they allow to be spread in those environments, under the guise of free expression or free speech. That there is all sorts of misinformation, disinformation, manipulated or manufactured data, and all sorts of content inside those platforms that are not in any way validated. Now there are some fact-checking initiatives, but most of it is not particularly validated or managed outside of what users and their communities can do themselves. The companies just provide the sort of place for those conversations and exchanges to happen, but they don't really feel the need, or they don't really want to be held accountable for all the side effects of the content and information that is cultivated within their environments.
Nicole, one of the problems that we have there is that, of course, in the past, people lived where they lived,
mm-hmm.
right? So they were sort of obliged to live with people that they did not trust, that people that they did not like, and living in community was that, right? Having to deal with the fact that because we were a community shared that same place, they had to respect each other regardless of respect or tolerate or whatever, regardless of if they thought that they were best friends or not. Technology provided us with this virtual world where we can meet people that, for whatever reason, we prefer to be together with, to mingle with. And of course, when this being together with people that are, for whatever reason, are mirrors of ourselves in the sense that they agree with everything, that they think that we're great because they think exactly what we think and everything, has caused problems that had not been anticipated. I think in a previous class, it was probably you that mentioned that some of these social networks, they don't want to have the responsibility for what is happening there. In fact, and my opinion is that it's not that they don't want to have the responsibility; they do not have the tools to make sure that they can, that they can do whatever they should do there, and they don't even they probably even waiting for our society to legislate and to define. Okay, if you want me to have any control here, you first have to specify which control that is, because of course, and again, there's this all this talk about values that were very important to our society. Freedom of speech was and is very important. But again, aren't we changing the meaning of freedom of speech when we allow people to freely speak about and freely speak to other people that will be in the same echo chamber and that will believe that they're doing it right, when there's no opposition to that idea, when those people notice that there is no barrier to their craziness, right? And in fact, in the virtual world for now, there is no barrier to our craziness, right? So in the freedom of speech in a world where others do not agree with your speech would allow you to very quickly be exposed to people that say, stop that. And you know that there would be pressure against freedom of speech in a world where there's no resistance, where there's no friction, as the virtual world is allowing our society to go back and to discuss ideas that we as a society have already condemned in the past, and to an extent that most people would think that those ideas are not even conceivable. So we will probably have to we either have to find ways of controlling our technologies somehow, and it could be, and even to have this control, it will have to be, what kind of control do we want to have? Is the state controlling? No way. Is social control? How does that happen? So there's a lot of debate, and this debate is all very, let's say, it is necessary. Right? I hear people talking about freedom of speech these days, and I say, freedom to speak about that? Come on, this is of course freedom of speech should be there, but we should also, before that, we should have some sense of the world, some sense of mankind that we developed over a long time. But this is all very. I think this is a problem that we have with our technologies. Our technologies, they're becoming each time faster in their development, and our social. The way we organize socially doesn't develop at the same speed. So I even invite those of you who and I think everyone should be interested in discussing technology and society these days. Of course, it's not our focus in this class here, but I think that whoever is well, not only in academia, whoever lives in this world should discuss technology and society to understand a little bit the ways we sometimes we push our technologies too far, and other times our technologies start pushing us in ways that we did not want to go. Right? I think we're in one of those situations right now with a technology that could provide us with wonders, could help us build a much better world than we ever had. But at the same time, we see and we see that with tight hands taking us to places that we never imagined mankind could ever go back to, simply because the expressions like that, for example, the freedom of speech, which is something very, I mean, anyone going against the freedom of speech, anyone going against, the ideas of community and the ideas, I mean, the democracy and everything. Anyone who says anything against those things seems to be someone that we should not listen to. But at the same time, what we are referring to as freedom of speech today is very different to all of those who defended freedom of speech in the past. Freedom of speech was to allow possibly those who were not being heard to have a chance of being heard on noble issues. We're now providing freedom of speech so that jerks can say whatever they want. Hi guys, I just included here in our chat a link so that you answer a few questions for us to try and see how we're dealing, how we're doing with respect to our wisdom of crowds, right? So, the questions are these ones. What the typical cruise speed of a Boeing 777 in kilometers per hour? Don't cheat. You cannot check on Google, right? It's your own assessment, your own unbiased assessment, or in fact, your own biased assessment. Hopefully, we'll see how we do as a group afterwards, okay? What is the population of Sydney in Australia in millions of people? In which year did Well, those of you who have already answered this question, I have another question for you, which I will also include there in the chat. And in this case, to be answered by those of you who were born on an odd day of the month, all right, 1, 3, 5, 7, so on. And the second questionnaire is for those who were born on an even day of the month. My idea here is simply to have half of you answering each of the two questionnaires. Don't look at the other questionnaire, right? Just get the questionnaire that fits you for now. This is an even shorter questionnaire, but first, so answer the one with the wisdom of the crowds first, and then answer the second one that left. Please tell me, because I have to re-include, because otherwise I think you will not have access to that. I will work for a little while in those answers here and try to make sense of our wisdom of crowds, and I'll be back to you soon. Just keep working on the forums, okay? Let's just have a look here at, I just calculated the wisdom of crowds of our group. For the first questionnaire, the questionnaire on the wisdom of the crowds, what is the typical what is this? What is the typical cruise speed of a Boeing 777 in kilometers per hour? Well, we had values ranging from 150 kilometers an hour to 1,200. Okay, and well, if we're wise enough as a group, the speed that we got there was and I just calculated the median. By the way, we did not discuss why is the median considered better than the mean for this kind of assessment of the wisdom of crowds. Any clues?
I think it is because using the median instead of the mean, you can remove like outliers.
Exactly. It's exactly that, Pedro. When instead of the mean or average. In fact, I think there is a difference between mean and average. But anyway, for me, it's the mean. It's of course it is a number in the middle, but it's affected by outliers. Outliers are numbers that are too far out in one direction or the other, right? The mean is affected by an outlier. For example, I have here the median, okay, for this last column, median. And I will calculate here on top the means, just so that you understand that. Here I have the mean, and you will see what happens here. For example, oh, it's not mean, average, maybe?
It's average.
Average, okay. I don't know exactly what the difference between mean and average is, but anyway. So this is the average, and I'll copy to the other ones here. So we have the mean. Right here, average. We have the average and the median. The median was 900. The average was 758. Why was the average lower than the median? Because we had some, let's say, outliers here. Someone who wrote 150. That was too low compared to the majority of the people, right? The same way, for example, if I take this one out, if I just take this number one, the 150 out here, notice that it already improves the average quite a while, right? I don't want to bias this, so I'll leave the way it was. But let's say that here someone thought that the speed of the cruise speed of an aircraft there was 3,000. Let's see what will happen. Check that. I'll put 3,000 here instead of the 900 that someone had written. Check what happens to the mean and the average. The mean keeps the same. The average, see, it was pushed up. Okay? So this is the reason why the mean is basically I take one to get to the mean. I have to take one out from the top and one out from the bottom, and then the second one out from the top, the bottom, and the second one out from the bottom, and there I go until I end up with just one number at the middle. If I still have two numbers, then I average those two, right? This is the definition of median. So notice the median here was 900. By the way, could anyone consult Google now and check what the typical cruise speed of a Boeing 777 is? Just to make sure. I don't know, but Google surely knows. And maybe you could also be doing that for the other questions as well. We had here, what was the population of Sydney in Australia in millions of people? The median here was 5 million. The average was 5.4 in this case here. They're not too far away, but notice that we still have a lot of differences here. Some people claiming that Sydney has 2 million people, 2 million inhabitants, and others saying that it has 15 million, right? Which means that there is distortion there in the extremes, and the median the median may be a better result. Could anyone find the average speed, the real one here?
I'm posting the answers in the chat.
Well, you can just say it, and then I was for Google.
905 kilometers per hour.
805.
905.
905.
Yeah.
Are we close? In this case here, are we close enough? Do you think that we worked well as a crowd? Notice some of us apparently had no idea. I don't know who this person is, but I hope it's not an airplane pilot, because I think they're probably one of these Boeing 777 need to speed up to 150 so that it can take off. But I don't know. Again, I'm far from being a specialist here. But notice that we were, as a group, we were close enough. The population of Sydney, Nicole?
A little over 5 million. 5,057 million. Not even 500.
5067, like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw.
Almost 5.1.
Okay. Well, anyway, it doesn't. We don't have to be that precise here. And again, of course, when I say Google's answer is not a definite answer because we may.
Changed.
It depends on. I mean, we may have gotten a different census there. But notice, are we doing fine here? Again, notice some of us thought that the city was or had 15 million inhabitants. Others thought that it had 2 million. There was someone here who didn't take a guess. But anyway, let's get to our third question. In which year did Nirvana release the album Nevermind?
1991.
Are we good at that? Gee, we didn't plan this, but notice. Now we are all going to be advocates of the wisdom of crowds. And what about Mamonas Assassinas, the year that their plane crashed?
1996.
All right. Of course, there are cases here that we have specialists. For example, for Mamonas Assassinas, there's a fan here, right? This guy knows exactly the year. There's another fan here who knows precisely when they died. So there's always going to be a specialist who knows better than, or that could know better than the crowd. But that's not necessarily the case. And it may even happen that our specialist doesn't know he's a specialist, right? I don't know if you were ever in one of those situations. And in fact, I would say the more specialized someone is, the more someone knows something, the more that person knows that he or she doesn't know anything. Haven't you noticed that? People that are really knowledgeable, they are usually much less secure about their knowledge than others who claim that they know. Think what would happen if instead of doing the wisdom of crowds experiment here the way we did, without or the way we did just as an aggregation process, without allowing you to influence each other, do you think that we got better results this way, or we would get better results if I allowed you to communicate, to take, let's say, already a collective decision by means, not by means of aggregation, the way we did, but by means of coordination and also cooperation? Do you think that our result would be better?
Yes.
You think that it would be better if we had, if we opened for discussion?
According to the text and the figures in Moodle, no.
Yeah, for Surovieki's, based on Surovieki's arguments, no. What would happen is that those of us who were more influential in the group, sometimes the professor, sometimes, well, whoever speaks louder, or whoever doesn't give the others the opportunity to talk, sometimes those people are going to influence the others, and they're going to influence towards a direction that is not necessarily the one of the wisdom of crowds. However, in a small group like ours, in a group of, let's say, scientists that know that they have 2 ears and 1 mouth, that are willing to hear their colleagues' arguments, I would say that there would be a probability that we got a better result, right? Of course, we will get better results from a more, let's say, democratic consensus or consensus generation effort if we are willing to pay attention to others, and of course, if they are willing to pay attention to us as well. So, for example, we do have a few specialists here in in airplanes, right? Some people were, I mean, they were quite good here. These guys that said 900 kilometers an hour. Well, I will not. This was supposed to be an anonymous, let's say, decision-making process. So I will not ask those who were. See, that there's another specialist here. Do you think, if you were one of those specialists, do you think that you would be able to convince maybe these guys here that the speed has to be much faster than that? And this is the speed that's maybe, sorry, that's maybe I don't know what I did here. So I'm messing up with that. What's happening here? I don't know what happened with my screen here. That's right. Okay. Okay, maybe these guys are able to convince these guys. For example, one argument that I would have for someone who wrote 150 kilometers an hour, I say it would be, well, this is the speed a car can go on a road. I mean, I'm sure that I can speed even my Ford Fiesta to 150 kilometers an hour. Of course, no doubt, right? And I'll surely have to turn off the air conditioning, otherwise there is no chance. But this is the speed that I can see cars going about, right? So I could probably move this person to a higher number, right? So I mean, there are things that people can say that could convince others that their gas can be improved. But notice, always, yeah, go on, Paris.
Yes, I do believe in this. When we are in the meeting, when in the organization, sometimes people express their opinion about numbers or about the knowledge, and we have to agree with them. And so it's no disagreement, but we have to have argument to do this.
Yeah, and notice the reasons why some of you are sort of, although notice our wisdom of crowds here was perfect, even with, and we only had 14 participants, right? Of course, Soroviecki says that this is good for large numbers. 14 is probably still a small number, but we were very good with our wisdom of crowds. The advantage that we have in an organization, in a small group of people, and if there is trust among them, is that they probably know who knows better about what topic. Right? When we're talking about large numbers, the wisdom of crowds, we don't know who the specialists are. And again, even the specialists may not be as secure about their knowledge. And whenever another louder participant of the group says, I know that right, the real specialist may even step back and say, well, sorry, yeah, no, I'm not sure about this. What I can tell you is, in general, specialists tend to be, I mean, they know a lot, but because they know a lot, they also know there's a lot that they don't know. Right? So specialists tend to be less secure, less, let's say, kings of their own truth than the less, let's say, less knowledgeable people. Right? But in organizations are in that sense are different. If you know the people that you're working with, a team, if you work as a team usually knows who knows best about each different topic, and then you can rely on a different, let's say, expert at each time. Although I'm afraid to say this more ad hoc way of working in teams, in groups, in organizations, it only happens at the more operational level, unfortunately. The decision making many times is happening in a very autocratic way. It's the boss dictating where you have to go. So it seems that we use the collective intelligence to take the operational decisions, but the more strategic decisions that are the ones that we would probably wish to be, wish that we had no bias at all, those are still being taken with all the biases of those decision makers. So I agree with Pericles. In small groups, when you know people, when there's trust and everything, there's the possibility of people talking more openly about the problem and maybe getting to a consensus decision. But that only happens, and that happens well when you know that someone who's providing you with some idea or some comments, you trust what they're saying about that topic. Otherwise, you disregard. Yeah, Roberto.
When you set opinion, you have to trust in this. You have to responsibility in assume that number or that position. So the organization have to have people who are in charge of this. We hire people to do this. The people are commitment to the results of the organization. So if you put a number that's not correct, you can pay for it. So you have to be sure. You have to be sure about what are talking about.
Yeah, but we have to agree here, Pericles, that most of the things that we would like to be sure about are the ones that we have no idea. I mean, and again, it's the strategic numbers. For example, when you're in a meeting and people ask your estimate for the market of the company's products next year, you will take a guess, right? And you will take a biased guess based on whatever information you have. You're still being sincere. You're doing your best. But again, are you? I mean, you're paid to give your best guess. But is your best guess better than the wisdom of crowds? I don't know. We'll have to figure to decide. And there will be situations in which the wisdom of crowds will work well. Remember, I think it was Guilherme had given us the four main conditions for the wisdom of crowds to work. And doing the way we did here, we respected at least the thing that we were not going to bias others with our own opinions, right? There are many, I mean, if there is someone who's a Nirvana fan here, this person would say, look, I know everything about Nirvana. And this album was released in 1991. If you trust that person, you can say, well, I had no idea, but then I will accept that this person is the knowledgeable person right now. What I was saying is that it's interesting that many teams or task forces and organizations, they become very ad hoc. They change leadership depending on who is more trustable for a specific activity, for that specific task. But we never hear of companies or organizations that change leadership each time there is, or each time someone else would seem to be a better leader to lead the organization at that time. So we work ad hoc. We work in this more chaotic way of there is no, well, there may be a coordinator, an organizer, but there is no boss for teams working operationally. And when we get to the top of the hierarchical pyramid, sometimes no, most of the times we don't use the same logic, right? It's always the same people taking the decision with their same biases, the same biases that they've had for their whole life, and confirmation biases, because many times they were right in the past and they believe that they will be right again simply because it has already been right for them. Well, anyway, someone had said, yeah, the median is much better than the average in all of these cases here, actually. It was a very pedagogical example, and I can assure you that it not always happen exactly like this. Sometimes there are some fluctuations, but it's also because we are not respecting a number that Galton also emphasized. We need, for the wisdom of crowds to work, we need large numbers. We are working here still with small numbers. Next class, we will do an exercise in which we will start with the wisdom of crowds using all its assumptions, and then we will turn into what you seem to prefer also, which is debating and discussing ideas, and we will see if we improve the quality of our decision making. I can already assure you that it probably will, because we are a small group, and a small group that has some level of trust on one another, that would be committed to the ideas that you believe that you're more knowledgeable about, and that will refrain from stressing your opinion when it's a topic that you don't know so much about. So it will probably work. All right. Okay. Let's have a look at the other two questions that I posed to you. Also, I haven't seen them yet, so let's see how.
Alexander Guilherme raised his hand.
Yeah, go on, Guilherme.
Oh, sorry. I raised my hand because I was thinking in the mathematical terms of the median and in these questions, but then I realized I have to think a little bit more to talk about my logic. So then I.
Okay. Oh, no worries. But anyway, you understand that the reason why we stick to the median with large numbers, it is to avoid the outliers. Those that are, for example, if someone wrote here 10,000 kilometers an hour, probably the speed of a rocket that will fly to the moon. I don't know. Notice how much this will impact the average, and it doesn't impact the median at all. If I put 100,000, very dangerous. Sometimes the guy didn't even want to write 100,000. It was to be only 1,000. But for whatever reason, the finger was there for a little longer on top of zero. Notice it doesn't change the median. Okay, so this is.
I was wondering in this case if we had another question like, are you sure or are you guessing? And I was curious about if the ones that have the right answer, they were sure or they were guessing, because then in this case my question that I raised my hand was, if one person has the answer, it would be enough or not. Then we're just trying to find a sample, the one who has the answer or not. And
this is a very good question, Guilherme. And again, if we're talking about the little team Pericles was thinking about, a team that you trust, if someone says, I am sure, everyone will go with that person's idea, right? Now, in the middle of the crowd, you don't know the person. It could be, this person would be nuts, complete crazy. And he says, I am sure, will you trust him or her? Right? Probably not. and the idea is don't trust anybody. The idea of the crowds is you trust the crowd. The crowd will do well. Okay. So again, there will be situations in which we can use collective intelligence as being trust the crowds and don't trust anyone individually. And there will be other situations in which collective intelligence will mean trust the individuals that are part of well, then I will not call a crowd, but that are part of a collective, respect their knowledge, respect the understanding that the group itself has about all the other individuals, and you will get a better result. So each tool, each approach will work better for a specific situation, right? And again, remember, now that we live in a world where people are exposed to different realities, where they live different realities, is it trustable when someone says, I know the answer? Again, think politically, regardless of where you are locked in the echo chambers of our crazy society. Would you trust the answer that someone would randomly say, yes, I know the answer for this. I know who the best president for this country will be? Well, I can tell you, even in less extreme situations, the last time I was able to vote for president in this country was, I think, in 1988. After that, I always canceled my vote because I thought that the alternatives that were being given to me were not good enough for that they were not respecting me. And I keep having the same impression. In fact, I have the impression got even stronger. So I will most probably have to, this year I'll most probably have to travel somewhere during election so that I say, put me out of this decision. I cannot help taking a good decision when the alternatives do not seem good to me. But anyway, again, that was I went beyond the frontiers or the borders that I usually take in discussing politics here. But only to tell you, would I trust anyone who said, I know the truth, I know where we should go in a situation like this? No. But I can still, and we have a huge problem in an election, for example, because the conditions for the wisdom of crowds are not there. People are locked in their echo chambers. They only talk to people that think the way they do. And when they do that, it's just a matter of knowing which echo chamber is larger. Right? This is what we'll be deciding, right? Which echo chamber is larger, which means that a specific group will be able to do what has been happening for quite some time, impose their ideas on the others, simply because of a majority of whatever kind. Okay, so this was, as I told you, I did not see the answers for the other two questionnaires that I posed to you, but it will be interesting to see together with you. One of them, I don't know what I did here. Let me see. Okay, I had 8 questions for this question here. What do you think the population of Turkey is in millions? And here, I had some 11 questions. Oh no, hang on. What happened here? Anyway, it seems that I have, no, it's not what I want. Just a second. I have 11 answers to this. Okay, these graphs are a little crazy, but anyway, this group here, I had eight people answering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 people apparently. Maybe someone. Oh, it's because there are 2 people that answered here. Okay. These people here answered. Someone said that the population of Turkey was 35, 60, 70 million people, 80 million people. It seems that the median here is 80 million, 90 million, 140 million, and look at this outsider here. What is this? What is this? Oh no, this. Oh, sorry, no, this. Sorry, this guy here is 80 million as well. Okay, it's 80 million. It's just that they wrote it. So it's over here. Okay, so this is the numbers we got for this question, and this guy is here. What do you think the population of Turkey is? 2 million, 25 million, 32 million, 40 million, 60 million, 70 million, 80 million, 90 million. I don't know why these two were not together. Great, but anyway, what's the difference between the question here? What do you think the population of Turkey is? And the question here, it's 2 groups. They were asked, what do you think the population of Turkey is? Is there any difference there? Let me try and do something here. I will average the answers that we got here. Oh, it's already, hang on. There, I wonder if there is, hang on. Yeah, okay. Let me see if this is, so this has already been calculated here. Average of C2 to C14 should be C15, right? So C15, oh. Okay, the average here was 54 million. Let me see here one thing. Just 1 second, let me try and see. I will just change this 80 million here to 80, okay? So that, because it's 80 million. Okay, 80 here just to, no, hang on. Okay, and what I'm seeing here is that let's see what it's showing here. C2 to C13. Okay, there's something that happened. What happened? Hang on. Where is it? Why is it not showing? Okay, 78, 75, and here it was 54, 50. There's going to be something that you'll notice here. When I asked the first group here, it was 8 people, and the second group was 11 people that answered today. All right, we have more people here in the results that I'll have, and the reason is I thought I had erased answers that I had from a previous use of this form here, but apparently we had a few answers there. But anyway, it was people just like you that had to answer the same question. So let's say we have 13 answers, sorry, 12 answers here, and we got, this is average, right? We got an average here. Maybe we should, instead of average, maybe we should use the median as well. We had a median of 80, okay? And the second group, I'll also change to median here. And the median here was 60. And what was the difference between the questions that I asked them? Look, the question was, what do you think the population of Turkey is? And here, what do you think the population of Turkey is? So how come if I ask exactly the same question to a large group of people, it's not that large, but still, I get here an average of 80 million, and here I get an average of 60 million. Any clues?
You had a bias by the first question.
I had a first question there. So let me show you what the first question. Yeah, when I got here the median of 60, my first question was, do you think the population of Turkey is more or less than 50 million inhabitants? And for the other group, the question was, do you think the population of Turkey is more or less than 100 million inhabitants? Do you agree with me that, I mean, the first question is irrelevant for the second question if we are completely rational, right? I mean, probably in both cases, I mean, people had an opinion, but then I asked precise, okay, so what do you think the population of Turkey is? And then because of the first question being different here, I anchored people's minds to this number 100 million. And the second group, I anchored their minds to this number here. So see, when we talk about biases in a group answer, it's not only bias because of their previous knowledge of the world, it's also bias that we include because of the way we ask them something, right? So see how dangerous it is to rely on the wisdom of crowds if we start tricking the answers by the mean we ask questions. Again, you know, whenever we do a survey, what we are trying to do is actually collect some intelligence, right? I've already mentioned the word collected intelligence. If it's collected or collective, it's just a matter of how we define. But anyway, we're collecting intelligence, but if depending on how we collect it, we already bias it. And this is an example, a very clear example of how we can bias the obtention of some collective intelligence or some collective knowledge. I remember that once I had it was a guy who lived in the same in the same apartment building that I did. So I can't say that he was my friend, but it was someone I had some acquaintance with for a while. And he was a realtor. He sold apartments, basically, here in Curitiba. And once we were having a barbecue there at the social area of the apartment building, and he was bragging that he was a good seller because he knew how to deal with people's emotions. And what he was doing was a bit like what we did about the population of Turkey. Whenever he was to sell an apartment in an apartment building, well, this was at a time that people sold apartments by placing advertisements on a newspaper, right? And whenever he was selling an apartment, he would place 2 advertisements at the newspaper. He would pay, well, and it was a time that we paid for that, right? He would pay extra money to have 2 advertisements. One was for the apartment that he wanted to sell, and the other one was for an apartment that he wanted to use to anchor people's minds to what would be a good price for that apartment. So, for example, he had an apartment at the 10th floor, and he was willing to sell that for 500,000 reais, for example. He would create the advertisement of another apartment in that same building on the 2nd floor, right? Usually, for whatever reason, here in Brazil, we think that the highest an apartment is in an apartment building, the more expensive it is. Probably it's quieter, I don't know. But anyway, he would put an advertisement for an apartment that people would think would be cheaper, and he would he would decide on a higher value. This apartment didn't exist, right? It was not for sale. He would even create a telephone number for the interested parties to call, but nobody would call that number, or if they did, it would be a wrong number. But the fact was that he had already anchored the price of the apartment that he wanted to sell at the price that he wanted to sell, because he had a comparison that he would give people of another apartment in the same apartment building with worse conditions. Let's say, if I don't know if he ever mentioned photos of the apartments, because at that stage it was just messages on or advertisements on the newspaper. But I think that today they could trick us even doing something like that with photos. A nicer apartment in a higher level, a higher floor, and for, let's say, a discounted price compared to that other apartment that didn't even exist. And he said by doing that, he had a much higher percentage of sales than some of his colleagues in the market. And of course, after a beer or two, he was telling us all his tricks. At that stage, I was not studying collective intelligence, and were not interested in emotional tricks on people's decision-making processes. But we do have to be aware that it's very easy to anchor people's minds to ideas. Okay. Milton, I think you had your hands up. I don't know if you gave up or if it was a previous time.
No, I was just wondering about Guilherme's question about betting or guessing, and that's something that I try to discuss sometimes, because it's about trying to understand the differentiation among information and truth. We always think about the information as a representation of the truth of the world, and probably it is not. But first of all, it's a representation. There are some kind of we put something apart. But the question here is about the definition of truth. Because when someone says that I know this, it is considering something. How they know this. So a kind of definition of truth is that something that is justified truth belief. Something that I know that is just I believe on this. I believe it is true, and it is justified by something. That's the part that we usually do not think about. What are elements that justify my belief on this? And science sometimes is about discussing not the truth, but the justification of the results that we achieve by adopting different methods and perspectives, etc. We can achieve different conclusions about the same event, the same scenario, etc. And it doesn't mean that they are sometimes they are not colliding, but they are given different perspectives on something. But that's the point, about what are the justification of my belief, and the question that Guilherme put before is always it's kind of this: what are your opinion about your opinion? This is something that I believe is very important sometimes.
I understand the reasons why Guilherme was concerned about that, but at the same time, I don't think I'm skeptical about the results he would obtain if he asked people how sure they were about each of those answers that they were giving. Again, and why why do I think like that? Because I have this well, it's a belief. It's not. It has not been scientifically proved, but I have this belief that the people that know the most are the most insecure ones, the ones that will never say that they trust their knowledge, simply because they know that knowing something is very complex. Knowing something means also understanding everything that we don't know. And the more naive or the more or the less sophisticated a thinker is, the more he or she will be sure about the ideas they have. Right? Therefore, I think that if you ask people how sure they are, those who are wrong will be sure about being right, and those who are right will probably not be sure about it. This is my impression of the world. This is how I usually see that the people that I admire the most for their knowledge are people that if you ask them if they're knowledgeable, they will say that they aren't. And the people that I think that have the least to contribute to other people's knowledge tend to be the ones that are most emphatically fighting to make sure that their ideas prevail. So, Guilherme, I'm sorry, I'm skeptical. I understand the reasons why you would like to have that question asked. I do think, as Pericles mentioned before, I do think that this would probably work better in a small group where there's trust and where people know each other. But I don't think they would improve the results in a situation of wisdom of crowds. Although I think that this needs some experimentation, because again, in my case, it's just a belief. I think it's Nelson Rodriguez who used to say that the problem was when stupid people got together and confirmed their ideas, right? Because then they figured out they were able to figure out that there were other people that thought like they did, and they would never think that they were stupid. So when we suddenly realize that we are a society of stupid people, we are in bad shape because stupidity will be in control.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll figure out. I'll find out his actual saying and send it to you later, because of course he says that with much more property than I was able to do. But basically, it was confirmation is something that happens mainly among those who think that the world is that simple.
But this comes to my mind that the last week Nicole asked about fake news, etc. And sometimes I have the impression that we're dealing with this in the wrong way, because we're dealing about on the perspective of the ones who knows the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we divide the people among three types: the ones that know the truth, the ones that are trying to mislead someone else, and the ones that are misled by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But why this one? What are the elements that make them believe this? Because what are the cultural, or the social, the bias, etc., 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 that leads to, because we are always biased, yes, and as the Dunning-Kruger effect says, that exactly what you said before.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the point. When Soloviev tells that it's not possible to be a smart guy several times in a row, this is not exactly true, because if you ask, we've talked about the Iowa experiment, the market. They have training for people. They have the super forecasters. They have several people that are identified by the guys that they do achieve by far better results than others in a row, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in a row. So probably we can have this kind of reasoning about, because one of the guys who lead this project is Daniel Kahneman,
Mm-hmm.
who wants the prize, etc., etc. With the vertical, and that's something that goes against the point that Soloviev.
But even in those situations, all right, even if we do have a few individuals that are better in this decision making than most of us, are we able to depict who they are And are we able to say that, well, if they succeeded 3 or 4 times in a row, are we able to say that they will keep succeeding in the future? And are we willing to risk on that? Or do we prefer to go with the wisdom of crowds? Again, specialists is difficult to depict. And many times, even if we think, what is the difference between the visionaire and the absolutely crazy, that one that we would call in Portuguese, porra louca, right? What is the difference? Basically, that one has not failed yet, right? When he or she fails, it will move, will change from one category to the other. So are we sure that we want to commit to someone who has been right a couple or 3 or 4 or 5 times? Of course, there are, even statistically, there will be people that will be always right, although they don't even know why they're right. They're right because of luck or chance, right? Do we want to? Can we tell who is going to be lucky forever? If we could, I would say let's surely go with the specialist. If we can't, maybe. And again, if we go to our table there, let me go back here to. If we go back to this table here, and we see that the median, in fact, the median is always almost as good as the best specialist. Should we try and risk to find who the specialist is, or should we just decide it's good enough to go with the median? This is the argument of the wisdom of crowds, right? And again, there is a lot of flaws here. There's a lot of problems, and I think Guilherme was wise to depict the worst problem that we have there is that the preconditions that we need for the wisdom of crowds to work are not assurable, right? It's difficult for us to be completely confident that we do not have bias, that all those 4 preconditions that we established that they're met. And if we cannot assure that, we are already in trouble anyway. Well, guys, I'm sorry. I had planned that we spend a lot more time on our writing in the forum. I still want to give you at least a few minutes to do that. And another trick is, or my cheating is, you thought that you had 4 hours of class a week. Now you know that you have more, because as we haven't done what we were planning to do over these last 2 hours, we'll have to do it over the next 5 or 6 days until we meet next week again. We will next week we will be discussing. We'll go further on the discussion of Surowiecki's ideas. We will read chapters 2 to 6, and you'll see it's a very easy. I mean, it's bestseller kind of reading, right? So you just have to relax on a hammock and read. He will explore in further detail a few of the things that already appeared in the introduction here, and so we become a little more or less confident about the use of wisdom of crowds to solve problems. Guilherme.
Yes, well, I was wondering regarding research of collective intelligence, if there are different kinds of questions, different kinds of categories, because in this example of the class, we have exact answers. It's they're things from the past or they're exact numbers. But when we ask about the future, and it's a completely different question. So that's why I was questioning about the are you sure or not? Because I think in this kind of questions, I know it's 905 or not because it's a fact, not because it's a philosophical meaning of truth or the population of Turkey. If I say I know it and I'm not sure, then it's a human problem, and that leads to a different another question that we don't have time to ask to talk about this now, but it seems that we come back to the human systems, motivation, desires, biases all the time. So.
Well, we're talking about human collective intelligence, right? So yeah, humans will always be our problem and our solution.
and then it reminds me that in the Supermind book of Tom Malone, he investigates this and he brings this idea of social intelligence, and that is a measurement of human collective intelligence. So I was wondering if there are any other kinds of research regarding that connects human systems, human collective intelligence, all this emotions, motivation to collect intelligence. I would be interested to read more about it or know any other.
I would say that we're dealing sometimes with just 2 types of reasoning: deductive, inductive. Both are about the past. But we could consider, for example, a deduction. It's a different kind of understanding. The reasoning is not deductive in terms of laws, not inductive about facts, but about projective. So we are always dealing with by adopting a kind of mathematician or statistical perspective, we always will deal with what we know about the past, deduction or induction, then Popper comes to my mind, etc. But about the future, as we don't have enough elements and we don't want to project the past, we adopt a different perspective, and then we come to abduction.
But you know, Milton, I had the same sort of concern that Guilherme has about differentiating those situations for which there was a precise answer or one only possible answer, and those that involve a future that we will even create. So depending on the choice we make, we will create a future going one way or the other. The thing is, nowadays we can't be sure even about those realities of the past any longer, right? We live in and I'm not talking about a liquid reality or anything like that. And we have to go back to it's not only fake news; it's different concurrent realities that are created. So, Guilherme, now I think that the challenges that we have to deal with facts, facts that already happened, and facts that we still wish to happen in the future. The challenges are sort of the same, But I understand, and this is something that I wish you start categorizing in your notebooks there. Start noticing how different, we have different perspectives to the collective intelligence, but we have different kinds of situations. I had one student that was trying to map all the different possibilities of crowdsourcing, for example. And we have to. I mean, I hope that in this group here we'll have a lot of categorizers, right? People that will start saying, well, deciding on this kind of problems is different to deciding on those kinds of problems. And for these kinds of problems, I have a specific tool that is better adjusted, or a specific way of looking to the problem that is better adjusted. And when I go to the other side, I need different. It's almost like building a tool set. And there's the practitioner's tool set that you're going to use to change the world. And there is the academic tool set that will lead you to better understand the world, right? So start, Gary, what you're trying to do there is start doing that. Start checking where there are differences in the problems, there are differences in the solution. And I think that collective intelligence will be great when we use it for, instead of just solving problems, as it is usually the case, the most common cases, when we start using collective intelligence to ask questions. So it will be different, right? Because solving problems, well, we already have expertise that allows, well, if that's the problem, I have a solution. But is that a real problem? Is that the problem that we should address? So it's different things there. Rafael.
I have a reflection.
Okay.
It's correct to say that in order to understand collective intelligence, I first adopted the concept of diverging and then converging. Data collection is important, but I believe that most related is who I analyze the data, how I transform that information.
Yeah, it's a question for the whole semester, I think. And it's a question that at the end of the semester you'll say, Alex, I'm sorry.
1 million questions.
Yeah, I expected that I would solve a question, and we came up with a lot more questions. I think it's a very complex situation, Rafael. And again, I don't think that we'll ever find, if we could use collective intelligence or any sort of intelligence to define what the problem is and fix it in one way that is absolutely undisputable, then we wouldn't even need the collective, right? Because the collective is there when there is a chance that there is a dispute about the possibility. So, but it's part of the challenge here.
I would say that it's a very good question, and
it's a very good unsolvable question, Milton.
Yeah, but there's an important distinction. When we talk about factors, let's say about the population of Sydney. Okay, the discussion is about something that we can measure, we can weight, etc. And there are little discussion about the value of this in terms of the way we believe the world should be. But when we're talking about other questions, it's impossible to separate the fact that we are projecting and our beliefs that are go in different distinctions. And this guy is really putting a very, very.
It's metaphysical questions, right? Where you already have ideas that only allow you to think in a specific way.
No, it's not metaphysical, because depending on the way we put this question, it can be treatable because we always think about facts, that's something that is objective. And we are trying to reduce everything to objectivity. That can be measured and put in terms of numbers and weighted and averaged and etc. etc. And but even the positivism is not about this. Even when talking about, for example, Whitaker or Husserl or others that wrote about this, there are conditions that are, and the value, I think, is the value in terms of philosophical, social, etc., political value, is part of the fact is indifference, is impossible to separate them unless we acknowledge that values is part of any discussion of fact. Every fact is bringing values in its own definition. Mm-hmm. We are not aware of this, or we don't want to end mathematics. There are some guys that wrote a book here about the end of mathematics, a kind of genius about this. Very good reasoning on the book. And I used to be a mathematician 2 years ago. And that's the question. When talking about projecting something, we are always talking about factors, but what these factors are just the descriptions, objective descriptions of the world, or they are bringing values, always are bringing values and the perspectives and opinions and whatever. But in some situations, we can think they are not engaged, involved by values, but in others, it's not possible. That's why the kind of question about what are the justification of your truth is important.
Okay.
That's the point. That's why I believe that Guilherme's and Rafa's questions are sharing the same basis.
Okay, so very briefly, and because I'll have to leave very soon, otherwise I don't get to UTFPR for my early afternoon class. Maybe, and just maybe, this concern of Guilherme and Rafael and Milton about which knowledge or which intelligence is something more definite, and which intelligence refers to something that we already know, or at least that someone knows and is indisputable, and which intelligence still needs to be created. I think that maybe we could start thinking as follows. Maybe there is some intelligence that we will use to build the world. And there is intelligence that we will use to decide which world we want to build. Of course, the second one has to come before the other, but it seldom does, right? What happens usually, we have the builders going fast, and those who wished they could discuss a little further what to build, they're lagging behind. But we definitely have two kinds of intelligence to build there: an intelligence about what and why, and another intelligence about how. It seems to me that the intelligence about how seems to be quicker and faster, and many times it can already rely on previous more tacit mechanisms, while the intelligence on why and therefore what may be fuzzier and may depend on different tools and different kinds of approaches. And I hope that we can together we can and reading and seeing many of the examples that we will have during this class here, that we get at least a little closer to deciding how we will deal in each kind of situation. Okay. So again, for next week, we keep discussing the wisdom of crowds with all its very debatable concepts, with all its very difficult to achieve preconditions, but knowing that this is just one of the perspectives that we can take into discussing collective intelligence. It will provide us with a few tools that we can put in our toolbox afterwards, and hopefully we can. I cannot say that we'll be able to do this by the end of the course, because I've been teaching this course for quite a while, and I don't have some of the answers for the questions that you're posing myself, even now, right? So I don't think that we'll get to real answers or to definite answers, and mainly because maybe this is that second kind of problem that we were talking about. It's a problem that we will discuss to know the reasons, the whys, and maybe the whats. But the house will also be here, because the house will be checking how organizations are doing, how cities are doing, how we are involving people in ways that we move forward. But this house should always be subject to the whys and the whats that usually come afterwards, which makes life a little more complicated, a little more difficult for us to understand. Okay, so see you guys next week. I know that we had very little time to work on the forums, but hopefully you will be able to during the time that we have from now until next week, we can go back there and maybe do something as beautiful as what you did last week. It was really good. Okay, so see you guys. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Yeah.